morning, everybody. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. Happy Breaking Scandal Day, and welcome here. We've got Mirror editor Alison Phillips, who's joined us this morning. Morning, Alison.
Morning, Susie. Hello, everybody.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to go through your WhatsApp messages and ask if you'd show them to a journalist. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the amazing story of Jamie Mines, a single dad who lost both hands, a leg and a foot in a really dreadful accident at work. And thanks to some pioneering surgery, now has 2 transplanted hands with which to hug his twin girls again. It's a great read, and I really recommend you have a look for that one later on. But inside, there's a couple of stories I want to talk about today. The first is on page 8, where the TV chef, Tom Kerridge, is backing the Mirror's free school meals campaign. Now, he's saying, Alison, that, he grew up on them. He's now a millionaire. It's obviously done him no harm. It's helped him a lot in building his business and so on. And he's furious that there's 800,000 children whose parents are on universal credit, and yet they don't qualify for this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so this is a campaign that the Mirror has been running for quite some time now, because there is so much evidence that shows that if we could give free school meals to all primary school children, the benefits to both those children themselves, both in terms of they're able to learn better, because you can always learn better if you've got a full stomach and that's a kind of a healthy meal. So that then leads to sort of better academic achievement, better economic outlook for those people when they grow up. We can also nip in the bud the issue around obesity. So therefore, not only is that better for the individual children, it's better for the health service. We know the huge cost on the health service from obesity, and it's just better for discipline as well. So children that are well fed and they're engaged, and so therefore that is reducing costs again on the education. So I suppose the point I'm trying to make is there are huge benefits for the individual children, but there are also broader benefits for society generally. And so this is something we feel really strongly about. And it's amazing the support we've had from this from across society. And Tom Kerridge is a fantastic, he knows about food, doesn't he? You can spend a fortune going to eat in one of his restaurants. But it's fascinating that he had a single mum who held down 2 jobs. He was at that point eligible for free school meals. The irony is probably nowadays he wouldn't be eligible for free school meals, because unless your family got an income of less than £7,000 a year, you're not eligible. So that shows how few people are actually eligible for them now.
Exactly. And when you consider, as he points out there are a lot of people on 2 jobs who are on universal credit, who are working very hard, who are not lazy, and yet can't really stretch to a couple of quid a day for a school meal for a child. And they should be qualifying, and they're just not. Now, Robert here says that's disgusting. Children shouldn't be going hungry. We can give to food banks. Can't we donate to schools? It's called the tax system, Robert. And that's what should be paying for the schools to provide the right kind of food for our children. The fact they're not isn't something that really should be replaced by charity. The whole reason that the government runs schools is because charities used to do it, and not enough kids went to school. Not enough kids benefited from it.
But I'm aware that a lot of people say, oh, well, there's not endless supply of money and who's going to supply the money. But I think with all these things, if we were to take a long-term perspective on it, the savings, both to the health service and the additional revenues that can come in if you've got a workforce that is earning more money, then that will, if we could just take a long-term approach to some of these problems, I think that there would be more money coming in as a result of this than going out. And there's some really interesting research from Sweden, and we did a big feature on this about 2 weeks ago, where since free school meals were introduced for everyone, they have seen all these benefits across all of society. And it's about this long-term planning into making us a better country rather than a country that's scraping by, that we really need to get to.
Yeah, and the trouble is, anyway, even if you did have a government, though, that said we're gonna do this, you're not going to see the benefits maybe for 25 years.
Oh no, absolutely.
There being another government in the meantime and go, oh no, that's a terrible idea. We're going to close that down. It's pretty high, isn't it? Now, Tom points out in there that subsidised meals are being given to people on £85,000 a year in Parliament, and they are getting cheaper food when they absolutely really don't need it. And it does rather stick in the throat, doesn't it? Now, how is this campaign going? Do you think that we're going to get there? Is Parliament going to see it the Mirror's way?
Well, so we had our morning conference yesterday, and we were discussing this story. And I was saying, right, we've got to keep going on this because I absolutely believe this is a winnable campaign. So Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, has introduced free school meals. You may have seen a couple of weeks ago in all the London boroughs. And I think that's a really interesting, and of course in Scotland and Wales, it's already in place. We're only talking about in England. I'm sorry to all those people who must be very cross watching this saying, well, we've already got free schools in Scotland and Wales, and you have, and that's fantastic. So I think if a Labour government, the Labour Party, I should say, doesn't commit to doing this when they get into government, I certainly be very, very disappointed, because I kind of think this is a real statement of intent that Labour would govern in a different way. And I think if we don't see some of these big vision things from Labour soon, it's quite disappointing.
There you go, Keir Starmer. You've been told your card has been marked by the editor of the Mirror. You've got about 18 months. Crack on with it, sunshine. And could you get your perspectives in the manifesto too, please? Thank you for that, Alison. What do you think, everybody? Do you feel that this kind of issue is something that Labour should be governing on, or should be forming policies on for when they come into power? When do you need to start hearing it by? Do you think that this is winnable? Do you think the Mirror's onto a winner here or not? Do you think this is something actually it's just never going to come back? It happened a long time ago, but now there's more children and there's less money, and it's just not affordable. Marco says, when Sunak can give thousands and thousands to his old school and kids are going hungry, he's detached. Yeah, there is a lot of tax breaks going on for some of the MPs' old schools, who are private schools, of course. They're managing to do quite well, and their kids all get fed nicely, don't they? But my daughter, for example, she's Key Stage 1. She's come up to 7. So she gets free school meals at the moment, but only until July. And after that, I and every other parent in the year are going to have to find the money to either pay for school meals or pay for packed lunch, which in itself is quite expensive sometimes, or find a way to do it. And some people can manage it and some people can't. It's going to be...
And there is a real issue around, I mean, God, anybody who's ever had to make packed lunches knows, the temptation to just lob a bag of crisps and a ham roll in there and hope for the best. And
are you saying that's
and I'm not blaming any woman that's done that, because I've done it many, many times. And as my kids will say, I make the worst packed lunches ever. But that's why, if we can give them a nutritious meal, that's so much better for their health, their ability to learn, for society generally. And I just think it's a real obvious thing that we could make a real change in how our kids are growing up.
Yeah, I was banking on a cheap ham roll being able to cover me. But obviously it would make a big difference. And of course, if a school is making those meals, it's so much cheaper than every individual parent.
Yes.
Either having to find a way to get a meal or provide some soup or a packed lunch or something else. It just costs more in the long run for everybody. So it kind of needs to. Anyway, we're going to move on now to the biggest story of the day, which broke late last night, which is a set of 100,000 WhatsApp messages. Pity the poor journalist who's had to go through those, between former Health Secretary Matt Hancock and his team at the Department of Health, which was sent during the pandemic. Now, because there's so many, they have by default cherry-picked a few to start off with. But the zingers that are causing a real ruckus this morning, there's one where an aide says the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, wants everyone going into care homes to be given a test first and segregated until they get the all clear. Presumably, that was to keep COVID away from the most vulnerable people. Yet, Hancock responds to that message saying he just wants to test those from going from hospital into care homes. So that means not everybody, not those from the community who were entering a care home. And of course, the community was where COVID was rife already at that point. So, Alison, between the date, this is the devastating fact, which not a lot of people are mentioning this morning, but between the date of Hancock's decision there and the date when the tests were finally brought in for everybody, those care homes recorded 17,000 deaths. That was a result of that text message, isn't it?
It really is horrendous, really. I mean, and the worst of it, do you remember back then they spoke about, we're throwing a protective shield around the care homes? Nothing could have been further from the truth. And if you speak to people who are working in care homes during that period, they tell you that it was absolute chaos and they were getting no clear direction, and that they had people dying around them, and they just didn't feel they're able to protect those people. Now, it is important to mention, I think, that Matt Hancock's come out this morning on the offensive and said that these text messages aren't complete, and that actually when he changed the advice from just saying we should test everybody to we should just test people coming from hospital, it's because somebody else had said to him, presumably not in the WhatsApp group, somebody else had said to him, this isn't manageable at the time. So it could be that, it's not quite as clear cut, but I think there is very little doubt that not enough was done at this time to safeguard these very, very vulnerable people. And the very idea that you have people wandering in to a care home, we had the most vulnerable people in our society, and no one was checking whether they had this killer disease, which it was at that point, is just unfathomable, let alone the fact that so much of this incredibly important policy seemed to be kind of like being conducted on a whim on a WhatsApp message. It's just extraordinary.
It's astonishing, isn't it? And Mike says, how dumb was Matt Hancock to give damaging secret messages to the woman who leaked the David Cameron stuff about the pig? We're not going to go into the details of the pig right now. I think anybody
let's not.
Know it can Google it. But it's breakfast. And yes, this is the thing, isn't it? Not only are they having these decisions and discussions on WhatsApp, but they're also handing it over to a journalist and then expecting this not to come out. I mean, to some extent, some of these messages are going to come out at the COVID inquiry. And the people who've released it are saying, well, we had to do it now, so we just can't wait for the COVID inquiry. It's too long. This has to be dealt with now. And Hancock's not really giving interviews this morning. He's sort of just letting it be known. He's sending out some friends to go and do it for him. He's letting it be known these published messages intentionally remove the mention of a meeting that took place between Whitty's advice and his decision not to test everybody, and that meeting, as you said, Alison, found that there was just not enough capacity to do the testing. It wasn't viable. It wasn't my fault, Governor. It was the fault of the system. Except, right? I can remember 2020. It wasn't that long ago, and I can remember PHE, Public Health England, announced they were scaling down the testing because they said that it's just everywhere. We can't keep up with it at the start of the pandemic. So, and Public Health England decided to scale down the testing. That's why there wasn't the capacity in the system to make these tests that Whitty was saying we had to have. And the person ultimately responsible for Public Health England was the Minister for Health, Matt Hancock.
I mean,
on him.
And if we had to keep anybody safe during that period, it was we had to keep those people that were most vulnerable, because those were the people already, the statistics were there that those that were dying were the elderly, people with underlying health conditions, were those that were most vulnerable. And so why those people weren't at the top of the list for being protected is just incredible. And I mean, as to the point about why on earth did he hand over his text messages, I mean, I don't think they can be, he's just a complete moron. I mean, so he doesn't even write his own book, that book that came out, was it just before Christmas? He just gets somebody else to write his book. And then
pocketed the money for the serialization.
And then just says, oh, look, here's a load of text messages, write a book around that. Yeah. And those text messages, they are in the public interest. And so the Telegraph, who got the scoop on this, has absolutely every reason to print them.
Exactly. If only you'd written your own book, Matt Hancock.
Yes, exactly.
You silly fool. But one of the things that's in here, tell us what you think, everybody. How do you feel about seeing these messages? Do you think it's the right way to be doing it? Should we be waiting for the COVID inquiry? Or is the court of public opinion the best option that we've got to try and prosecute some of these wrongs, if they were wrongs? Do you think that Matt Hancock's getting a fair crack of the whip? Do you think that he's going to be really taking the heat for all this when perhaps it should be someone else? Leslie says it's no surprise there'll be more to come. After all, we're paying money for Boris Johnson's legal aid to hide what he did. What else have they hidden away? I don't think he's getting legal aid necessarily, Leslie, but he is getting some legal advice to fight the Partygate allegations, which is being funded by somebody, but it's not legal aid in the same way one of us might get it if we had a criminal case coming against us or something. He does have enough money to pay for that, no matter what he thinks. But one of the things here that's also, not only are they not prioritising the sickest and the most frail, Alison, as you rightly pointed out, but the messages also show that at one point, a test, when we have not enough tests, remember, a test was couriered to Jacob Rees-Mogg's house to test one of his children. His children, who are not, presumably, as far as we know, have any vulnerabilities, not at great risk of COVID. No one wanted their children to have COVID, of course, at this point. But if you're in the government and you happen to know that there are people who really need the testing and don't have it, how on earth can they justify sending it to a house in Mayfair for a child?
I mean, it's
a child.
And the whole thing, it just, again, talks to this idea that it's not an idea, it's a fact, that there is one rule for them and there is one rule for the rest. Just like during that whole period when the rest of us were abiding by all those rules, at number 10, we now know that there was an endless partying going on. Just as we know that, Matt Hancock was having an affair with his advisor, just as we know that, Dominic Cummings broke the rules to go to Barnard Castle. If it had been one incident, then you could perhaps find some kind of explanation for it. But it's a culture of those in power during that period and subsequently probably just felt they can do what they like, and the rest of us, the little people, have to stick by the rules. And the Jacob Rees-Mogg one is just a great example of that, but kind of depressingly unsurprising.
Exactly. But I mean, it's the idea, I think, from Matt Hancock's point of view, if your boss is partying, if the chancellor perhaps is somehow or another, someone in his house is taking pictures of the boss who's partying, if Jacob Rees-Mogg is getting tests couriered for his fairly healthy and wealthy children to be checked, if Chris Whitty's saying one thing but the testing system isn't there and it's all kind of chaotic, from Matt Hancock's point of view, he probably was the most hardworking and efficient and effective person in government. The problem is, that means that it was Matt Hancock who was the most hardworking and effective person in government. The rest of them, like you say, was so appalling that the someone who would be in normal terms a pretty appalling minister appears to be the best.
I just think, there's in those exchanges of text messages, there's some good ones. There's some good ones between George Osborne and Matt Hancock, where Matt Hancock tries to say something like, the testing is going really, really well. And George Osborne absolutely cuts him dead and just says nobody thinks that the testing is going well. And then goes on to describe sort of personal disasters that he's had. And it does appear from the text messages, certainly from what I've seen so far, so much of the energy was going into how can we look good in this scenario rather than how can we be good. And I think that's a really interesting thing about it was all about how they were going to come through this politically rather than how on earth are they going to try and save people's lives.
Exactly. And they had this target for 100,000 tests a day. Human Being says, no one rule for all. We can do something about this if we really wanted to. Yes, we could, but not until there's a general election, probably, Human. That they had this target for 100,000 tests, and that seems they wanted to hit it, and they wanted to say they'd done 100,000 tests. So it was a case of trying to give the tests to the people who were going to be easiest to do or to get to or to return them somehow.
But also there's this... Sorry, so there's also this interesting thing about the accounting of the tests. It wasn't necessarily tests that had been completed, it was tests that they'd sent out. And so as they reached that deadline, they were frantically sending out tests because it would look like they'd hit the target. Whether they were actually sent out to people that were important or vulnerable or were going to even return them or even do them seemed to become a different issue.
Exactly. And now we find ourselves as a nation with everyone's got a couple of old tests in the bottom of the kitchen drawer that no one knows what to do with anymore. Robert says, we're being treated like mugs and it needs to stop. The parties that went on that day, I sat with a lady who wanted her daughter with her to die. Her last words, they never helped me.
I mean, and that, even it's funny, isn't it? Even 3 years on, that still makes me feel sort of a bit choked. And, and I think of my friend, my best friend whose father died of Alzheimer's during that period. And she wasn't able to be with him, and even now that absolute fury has not left her. And I think that emotion is raw with so many people because so many people lost people or so many people suffered in various ways. And again, a slight tragedy of that is the people who were most hardest hit, who were the elderly, the people with disabilities, the people from Black or minority ethnic groups who were adversely impacted, still still aren't being heard properly. This whole discussion is still taking takes place between the people with power. And I just think that's a tragedy, because if all those people who were really impacted by this had a louder voice, which is obviously what we tried to do at the Mirror, is we tried to get their voices heard more clearly, then I still think this would be sort of being treated as the absolute national scandal that it is.
Exactly. And it's about Matt Hancock, and it's about the Telegraph who's leaked the story, got these messages, and it's about, you know, whether it's the right thing to do and who said what to whom. But when it boils down to it, it's about people like your friend. It's about people like the test veterans below, Shirley Denson, who died at home with COVID, had lots of her family around her, but could have had more people if it wasn't the fact that she tested positive. It's all these, and there must be millions of people who are bereaved who weren't able to say goodbye to someone as a result. And that kind of rage doesn't go away. Then you've got maybe 1 million people with long COVID, many of whom were infected in that very first wave when it was running wild, and seem to have got it really bad, and it's lasted long term. I just wonder whether the people who are in power, when they made these decisions, if they ever stopped to think about the person who was on the end of the decision, because there's nothing in these text messages that talk about, gosh, I hope the care homes are okay, or the effect of it. It's all about what's viable. It's about the theory. It's about the practicalities. It's about this, that, and the other. It's about how we make it look. At one point, we've got Matt Hancock messaging George Osborne, asking for a front page story to make it look good. And I'm sure that people do that sometimes, Alison, but a decent editor doesn't go, of course, mate, just let me have a few words, which is what George Osborne did, not a journalist. They seem to have lived their whole lives separate from the rest of us because of the privilege they've had. And then when they're in the position of enormous privilege to look after us, they don't know how to do it.
And what's interesting, because these are like WhatsApp messages, text messages, it's a real insight into the real them, because quite often it's very difficult to see, because, you know, there's so many advisors and press people around them that very rarely do you really see the real them. And this is what we've got on this occasion, and I think that's going to be very illuminating. And of course, remember, this is only day one, so I imagine there'll be plenty more revelations to come.
Yes, well, we shall see, won't we? They've got a special website, the Telegraph, where they're starting to just upload something every day. It's going to be like the expensive scandal. This is new one. Here we go. It's worth keeping an eye on how things are going to happen, and I'm sure that Hancock's mates are going to be briefing people their side of stuff as well. But as Human said there, this can't wait for the inquiry. We need to have someone arrested and questioned under caution. Who knows whether that's going to get anywhere? I'm not sure what crimes can have been committed, but the fact that some of the people who are producing these stories are very skeptical about the government's ability to have done it properly, and the lockdowns that came as a result maybe are trying to prove that the lockdowns weren't necessary. But who knows if they had actually followed the science as they said.
And I think, also we have to remember this was an incredibly difficult period, and we were dealing with something no one had any experience of before. So I don't think so I think we have to show some sort of compassion as to when we talk about how those in charge tried to manage it, because it must have been very difficult. But that doesn't excuse incompetence. You've got to be competent even in a difficult situation, because that's why you're in the top job.
No, exactly. That is kind of the point of the whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you for that, Alison. Thank you, everybody. Now, we do have some good news in the world. We've managed to find some for you. It's actually quite a big bit in the paper today. And here it is. Now, this is a headline which is going to be ringing around your skull for the rest of the day, all right? This is your earworm. This is about a story about guitar-loving critical care consultant Tom Owen from Kendal in Cumbria. He's an anaesthetist who has started taking his guitar into work and giving patients a bit of a song. He does requests. He asks them what they want to hear. He goes away and learns it, and then comes in and does it for them. He works at Royal Preston Hospital's ICU, and he says some people have been left in tears because of what he's done for them, which I think is absolutely marvellous.
I mean, is that tears of joy or tears of, oh my goodness, stop?
Tears that the anaesthetist is playing music and they just want the pain to end. Is this proof, do you think, that despite all the strikes and unrest, the NHS can still strike a chord with patients?
Oh, nice touch there, Susie. I just think this is a lovely, lovely, lovely story. I mean, that this man, the critical care consultant, in his own time, then goes and he takes requests from patients as for their favourite song, and then goes back in and plays them. And if you go to the Mirror website, you can hear him singing on video, which is absolutely fantastic. And it's just a really great story of how caring and warm I think so many people are, and so many people who work in the NHS are, and that bit can often get forgotten and everything else. It's just that absolute just wanting to make other people happier and feel better. It's brilliant.
It's just that vocation, isn't it? The thing that comes, I'm just going to do a bit extra. This guy plays in a band at the weekends, and he thought, why not? It doesn't hurt.
It's brilliant.
I do wonder if someone tells him to get off and chucks a rotten tomato at him, if he doesn't get off out of the way or not. But well done, Tom, for doing that. And like I say, if it's on the Mirror website, so if you want to hear what he's capable of, have a look for it and go and have a listen to it there. Thank you very much for that, Alison. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. And thank you, Matt Hancock, for handing your WhatsApp messages to a journalist. Top work. Everybody do that, please. Thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Tatty bye.
Thanks.